Hey, what's up, guys? This is Vincent Willa, aka Vinny Vici 9586, making my first video for LegoPoker.com. I'm pretty excited about joining Lego. If you were to ask me my honest opinion, I would say that it's the best training site out there for full ring and six max players. I mean, there are a lot of sites with a lot of really, really good players, and um, I don't really want to take away from any of the ones that exist, but when I have been a member of different sites, Lego was really the only one that I was excited about every single video that they produced. I think they have a very deep lineup from A to Z, whether it's a micro stakes coach or a high stakes coach or full ring or six max or heads up, whatever they put out, it's quality material. So, uh, for those of you who don't know me, I'm a bit of a prolific full ring player. I got Supernova Elite in 2009 and 2010, and was sort of on pace for 2011 before Black Friday. And I have my graph of my hands posted right here, just to show you that I'm a decent winner and a competent player. I actually ran quite a bit under EV for the type of playing style I have. $10,000 for the stakes I play is pretty significant. As you can see from my reports, the bulk of my hands, about 400,000, were at 50 cent a dollar, and my win rate, as you can see, was about 3 PT, and the EV was about 3.25. Anyways, I just thought I'd start off with a little intro here and, let you guys see the sort of results I have. And my first video is actually going to be a video about river check raises. And I wasn't sure what I wanted to do for my first video, but I ended up deciding on this because when I looked through my database, I filtered my hands for the year to see which hands I check raised the river with, and I got only 224 hands over the course of, what was it, like 700,000. But in those 224 hands, I turned a profit of $10,000. So a full 1/6 of my profits were from river check raises. And like, obviously I showed up with the nuts in a ton of these spots, but I think my river check raises are one of the stronger aspects of my game, and the fact that we get to the river and have interesting spots to talk about on every street, I think makes all of these hands pretty interesting. So without further ado, I'm going to start the video. Alright, in this first hand, I went up jacks in the cutoff and get a 3-bet by CK the 1. CK the 1 is probably in like the 95th percentile in terms of most aggressive irregulars at 100 NL. As you can see from his stats, he's 3-betting 5.9%. And he has like a relatively high aggression factor. I guess, let me put my mouse over this. He was 3-betting the button 7% from the blinds 8 and 6. So like he had a positionally aware 3-bet stat. And based on my read on him, I hadn't caught him really 5-bet shoving light, and I had caught him folding to a decent amount of 4-bets. So if I were to 4-bet jacks here, I felt that he was only going to get in higher overpairs and ace-king. So if I were to get in jacks, it would be somewhat equivalent to just stacking like sixes out of just, oh, I don't know how to play this hand, like let me get the money in. Because I wasn't really beating anything, and between sixes and jacks, a pair is a pair. There's not much difference between them and how they do versus his range, other than the slight chance that I'm blocking him having jacks himself. So I think it's a call. I think it's a pretty easy call, unless I've been 4-betting him a lot, which I don't think I was at this point, but I definitely should have. As is, it's a flat. And the flop comes 9-8-4 with 2 hearts. I check to him. there wouldn't be any really point in leading here. I don't really think it merits much discussion. He bets 8 and a 13.5, which is a little bit on the small side, but there's so many regulars at 100, and there's so many 3-bet pots that I play every single day that it was really impossible for me to determine whether or not this was his standard sizing. I mean, if you were to put a gun to my head and ask me whether he was weak or strong in a spot like this, I would guess he's on the weak side. But given that information, why would I ever check raise my jacks here? There would really be no point. I think it would be a pretty good play to check raise queen jack here. I think it would be a good play to check raise maybe 7s or 6s. It's just because those hands don't have enough equity to continue versus CK the one's range. But I pretty often A, have the best hand, and B, when I do have the best hand, I often have my jacks often overcard one of his 2 overcards to the board. Like if he has like a ace 10 or like a queen 10 type of hands like that. My jacks are overcarding one of the 2 of them. So it's a pretty easy check call. Turns of 5 of hearts, and I check and he checks back. And this is really the crux of the hand, where like I go for a river check raise as a bluff. A little spoiler alert, but the reason I do so is because what is he checking behind on the turn? Well, it's not a flush and it's not 7-6, so it has to be some sort of pair or high card hand. Well, I don't even think it's that many high card hands, because a decent percentage of them, I don't know, like combinatorics, if that's even a word, but a decent percentage of them, I guess 40%, given there are 3 hearts out, and I have a heart, maybe less. A decent percentage of them have another high card and a heart, and I think he would barrel that. Like, there would really be no reason for him not to bet ace 10 with the ace of hearts, king queen with the queen of hearts. Those are all pretty good bets in this spot, because I would fold jacks like that. His range would be way too strong for me to continue, and I would definitely not feel comfortable at all. So what is he checking behind? I would say probably 90% of the time, maybe even 100% of the time. I mean, people are relatively straightforward. He has either like flop top pair, flop second pair that he decided to see bet, overcards without a heart that he's like, oh, I don't really want to spew off here, or an overpair with or without a heart. I don't think it's really significant or changes his decision that much whether or not he has a heart, because he's fearing a check raise if he has one or if he doesn't have one. Because say he has aces here, he has black aces, and I were to somehow like check shove my jacks here, it would put him in a pretty disgusting spot. And even if he had, like queens with the queen of hearts, he still doesn't really want to get check shoved in this spot. So he probably has all the overpairs in his range and all the overcards without a heart. That's what I think he has. And so I check to him again on the river when the queen hits, and he bets 18. And he could be bluffing in this spot. He could have like an ace jack, ace 10, ace king kind of hand. But I really don't think people try and bluff very much in bet check bet situations. And I think a very high percentage of the time, I would guess probably 90% of the time in this spot, he has a 1 pair hand, which is either a rivered queen or kings or aces. And so I'm not good to call against that hand, but I really, really, really like a check shove here. And the reasons are twofold. First off, he can never have a nutted hand. He would barrel the turn with jack 10, with 7-6, with hearts. Every single one of those hands that's a straight or a flush on the river. Whereas I could very conceivably have all of those hands in my range and play them exactly like this, check shoving the river. Because let's say I do put him on high cards or a pair. He isn't necessarily, or what I meant to say is, he's going to bet those 1 pair hands probably like 90% of the time, unless he's super paranoid that I'm check raising a lot. So I get just as much value from his one pair hands, even if he folds to my check shove 100% of the time. I get just as much value from a check raise as I do from leading out. And for the times when he doesn't believe me and I have a big hand, I'm going to want to be check raising in this spot. I don't really think I would lead any hand in a situation like this unless it had literally zero showdown value. And, looking at the board, looking at my range, 7-6 got there, Jack 10 got there, 9 is a 9 is a pair. Queen 10, Queen Jack, any conceivable float is, top pair on the flop or top pair on the river or a straight or a flush. Like, I have a ton of good hands in my range, and to be frank, Jacks is pretty near the bottom of it. Probably the bottom of my range is like a 8-7 type hand, but even that I'm folding a decent amount of the time pre-flop. So Jacks really are pretty damn close to the bottom of my range. It is the Jack of Hearts blocker to a flush, the 2 Jacks blockers to Jack 10, and it's really just an awesome, and in my opinion, one of the best check raise spots I've had this last year. So I shove it in, and he folds. So in this hand, I have 10-9 of clubs in the big blind, and the table dynamics of this hand is pretty significant because Mr. Profi S35 is a 74-22. So he's very, very loose and very bad, I guess, for lack of a better description. And true to form, he limps from early-ish position, gets raised by Count Berg, who's a 15-12. Probably some other pertinent stats on him are that he has a pretty high fold to 3-bet percentage at 74. That's the green number there. And it looks like he c-bets 70% of the time. And I guess my overall reads on him are that he's somewhat straightforward. I flop top pair and check to the PFR. He bets 9 and 12.5. And I decide to call. I don't think there's really any other play than to check call. If I had like jacks, I could definitely consider leading in that spot to get value from Profi S35. But if I had something like a set of 10s, 6s, or 3s, I would almost assuredly go for a check call or a check raise. More likely a check call, just given the board texture and that I wouldn't want to shut Profi out of the pot. But for example, if Profi were to donk bet and Count Berg were to call, I would definitely check raise 6s or 3s. I would still probably slow play top set because I have blockers to top pair. But the lower sets, I would just try and build the pot as soon as possible. So my top pair is good enough to float one off. Profi calls with worse, and Berg can obviously have overcards. Turns a 2 of clubs, which is a pretty good card for my hands. I can definitely check call again, but he checks back. And river is a jack, and he bets 17 and a 30.5. Unlike in the situation with CK the one, where I don't think, like in that hand, I didn't think that he would ever be bluffing. I think this is like certainly a much more conceivable bluff situation, just because he would probably expect me to lead a lot of good hands in this spot, but in reality I really wouldn't. And I also think his line is somewhat more credible because he can really check back a pretty decent hand, given that like the only thing that really coordinated the board was clubs, and like it's not like I have pocket 4s or pocket 5s for a gut shot on a turn. So he can pretty comfortably check behind for like deception or balance or anything like that. Whereas CK the one would always have to bet his strong hands on the turn. So I think Berg can have a lot of a lot more bluffs in his range. But at the same time, I just still don't really give people credit at 100-0 for bluffing that much. And so I wasn't really looking to call this bet and just, you know, monkey off some money and instead go for a check raise from 17 to 56. Um, this wasn't like as much of a fist bump check raise as the hand with CK the one, but I think that I just look a ton like top two or a set in this spot. Um, as I said, Profi being in his hand is pretty significant, and I could just like lead out into the field with a set, but that board is so dry. I'm getting a C bet every single time. I really don't think I would ever do that. I would only lead with a hand that I think crushes Profi, but is still somewhat vulnerable. So that would be sort of like an ace 10, pocket jacks, or pocket queens that I would conceivably lead. Aces or kings, I would probably 3-bet. Anyways, I have all the sets in my range because the board is so dry, and Jack 10 is a super, super, super common two pair. So, I'm repping the Jack 10 and the sets and like maybe 4-5, but in reality I probably don't call cards that low. But I'm repping those hands, and I have to make it a pretty big raise to get him to fold, and I'd probably make it a pretty big raise, similarly for value, but I just felt in this spot that I'd be getting respect here, and that I just rep the sets and the two pairs well enough to get respect. And even if it's not as good of a spot, even if the board is less scary than it was in the other hand, I think it's almost made up for the fact that Berg should be bluffing slightly higher or slightly more often than CK the one would. So yeah, he folds, and I scoop a pretty good pot. So here we go with a cutoff poster who sat down with $63, and I have nines in the small blind. Pretty easy raise and turtle flats, and the poster folds. I'm pretty sure I was aware at the time that there was a poster, so I would normally be raising relatively tight if I thought the guy was like you see Komarov 777 in the top right there. He's a 16-5, and if he limped the cutoff, I probably wouldn't be raising super light from the small blind. If a very loose player were limping the cutoff, I'd be raising pretty wide from the small blind. And in this spot, I would be raising super wide from the small blind just because it's a post and he can have any two cards. It's, way wider than a limp. And, the fact that he didn't even raise himself makes it weaker than what a quote-unquote random hand would be. Turtle flatting is somewhat scary. He's a 12-8, which is very, very tight, and he has a 2% 3-bet percentage. So I have to figure that he is certainly capable of flatting ace-king in this spot, and I think the best play for him would be to flat queens as well in this spot. Ace-king, I would be tempted to just raise, get it in. But queens, he would only ever be getting it in, flipping or behind versus me. So he flats, and we go to the pot heads up. And I bet 5 and a 9 on the flop. In retrospect, I think this is too small. It would be nice to say that I'm perfect and I don't make mistakes, but I think it's pretty obvious that I don't really have anything that good when I bet this small, and that in reality, I saw this flop and I looked at my hand and I'm like, well, I have the best hand a decent percentage of the time, but I can't check call. But if I bet too big, it's a bluff with no outs or 2 outs, and I was sort of unhappy with the situation. I think that was my reasoning for betting small. And like Turtle's good, but I didn't really feel like he was gonna like jump on me if I bet small, and so it's what I went with. And maybe it is the best play. Maybe I am saving money by quote unquote having exploitable c bet sizes, but I think he's aware enough to possibly read into it. Turn is a queen. I check, and Turtle checks back. I'm feeling pretty good once he checks back that maybe he has 8s or 6s and just didn't believe me on the flop. So I'm pretty happy to get to the river and check it down. But I check and he bets, and I'm just in my mind like 100% sure he had a jack. I was like, oh, this guy has a jack, and he's trying to get thin value. Blah 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 blah. I was sort of tilted. If you look at his bet sizing, it's covered up. 13 and a 19, definitely not a huge bet. But at the same time, it's like such your typical, oh, I have like a good pair on the river. I'm gonna bet 2/3 pot. And I was kind of annoyed. So I'm like, well, F this guy, 53, boom. But he called with kings, which is pretty surprising. Um, I guess if you think about it, I made the mistake in this hand of not really representing as many combinations as I would have in the other hands. In the other hands, felt pretty comfortable saying I have the nuts in my range, I have sets in my range, blah 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 blah. In this spot, I would bet jacks on the turn, I'd bet sevens on the turn, I bet threes on the turn, I bet queens on the turn. I would probably limp behind fours on pre-flop. So basically, what I'm repping is spew and tilt based on the fact that he's clearly representing, a one pair hand that's just like milking me. And it works some percentage of the time, but not always. And I have to give credit to him for making a good call. Like in this spot, I mean, I would never check as much as he would never check behind a good hand on the turn. I would never check a good hand to him on the turn, or if I did, it would be pretty rare because like if I had like a queen jack for full ring, for those of you who don't play, would be a little bit of a thin, or maybe just straight up thin check raise on the turn. So if I were to be check raising the turn with a nutted hand, it would be like queens or jacks, which obviously have blockers to top pair, and would pretty conceivably fold out the kind of hand he had, kings. And so if I have queens or jacks and I'm trying to get value, it's from hands like sevens or threes, which, the money's getting in anyways if I bet. So really by far the best play with my range on the turn is to just bet again. I really shouldn't be check calling very often. I was check folding this particular hand, and then when I got to the river, I was happy to check it down. I was like, cool, like I'm gonna probably get shown tens, but whatever. And once he bet, I got sort of annoyed based on the fact that I didn't think he had anything. So I made the check raise, and I think this is a good example of how you can get sort of overzealous with check raise bluffs, and how because I would very rarely check a good hand on the turn, it doesn't even matter the fact that he is a one pair hand. He can definitely call, and in this spot, like I don't think many players are folding kings just because they tell themselves, "Oh, I underrepresented my hand. He doesn't know what I have. His line looks full of shit." And my line did look full of shit, and he made a good call. So hats off to him, I guess. Now in this hand, I'm up against the player Bully Johnson, who is sort of a semi-reg right now. Not to say he's not a good player, but he doesn't really play as often as he used to, say, 2 years ago. And at the time when I played with him a lot 2 years ago, I sort of ran in the like 10-8 territory. So he probably still thinks that I'm a super nit. And I sort of take that into consideration when I play pots with him. He raised under the gun. I flat nines. It's not really the best spot in the world because I sort of have what I represent when I flat the small blind, but at the same time, you have to be flatting something, and I guess nines is one of the better hands you're gonna get, and I'm not folding it, and I'm not three betting it, so by default, it's a flat. Flop is 10-4-7. I check. He bets. I call. I get honestly probably just fold this flop. It's a little weak, but given that he raised under the gun, you know, if it's a good call, it's so slight in your favor. And, it's not like it's the driest board in the world. I'd feel a lot more comfortable with a pair over the 10. I don't know. It just feels super nitty to be like, oh, 10-7-4 flop. Gotta give it up. But I was like, I'm not super happy. I guess another alternative is to check raise bluff. But that sort of gets kind of spewy. Um, because like my hand has so few outs to improve. If I just really don't think I would check raise in this spot much unless I had a set. To be frank, I'm trying to think of bluffs that I want to do it with, but the heart hands that I'm flatting here, like the ace king, ace queen, ace jack of hearts that I might flat. I wouldn't really feel like check raising them because I would have to fold to a 3-bet, and I could definitely take him off a hand on a later street by like leading the river or something. Anyway, so I check call. It's close. It's marginal. It's might get annoying later, but it's whatever. This is like poker, I guess. When people are like, "Oh, that's poker," or like these are the decisions that make it interesting. I guess that's what you sign yourself up for when you play versus like relatively competent opponents and spots where you really, to be a good player, you have to play them, but they're never particularly comfortable. I check call. Turn is a jack, which is really good for my hand because it gives me a gut shot. And I remember thinking to myself that I was going to check raise this turn as a bluff to get him to fold aces, kings, queens, ace, king, ace, queen, king, queen. All those hands that he's barreling. And he'll stack sevens, tens, and jacks. Actually, to be honest, he might fold sevens versus me. He bitches a lot in chat about how tight he perceives me. So it's actually completely conceivable that he would fold sevens, but he would never fold jacks or tens. And say he somehow does not believe me with king, queen, I have the best hand. And if he doesn't believe me with aces or kings, I have 6 outs to improve. So it really would have been a good spot to check raise bluff the turn. And it's significant that I have 9s in this spot because I'm flatting 9s, but I'm also flatting 7s, 10s, and jacks and 8s and queens here. So of all those pairs I'm flatting on the turn, a decent percentage of them are sets. And I think in that regard, his logic for checking behind the turn with like possibly a decent hand, is because he definitely thinks that I have something good in this spot. Those middle cards smack my small blind flatting range. River is an ace, and my chances of having the best hand are about 5%. At the same time, if I were to lead here, he would just be like, oh, top pair I call, or oh, kings or queens I call. Like, people don't really like folding to just one bet on the river when they can get a cheap showdown. Like, maybe he would fold kings or queens, but I mean, he definitely wouldn't fold an ace, and I just didn't think it was profitable. Although in retrospect, it's a smaller bluff than what I ended up choosing, so maybe it's okay. He bets 8 into 15. So at this point, the chances of him bluffing have decreased dramatically. I would really guess he has the ace, king, ace, queen a ton here. And I felt pretty confident I could get him off that hand by repping jacks or well, now that I think to myself, I wouldn't have 10s or 7s too often. I would probably check raise such a coordinated board. But I'm still pretty comfortable with my play, and not to be results oriented, but it did work. I did get a fold out of him. I think this was more of an image play than a representing hands play. And if I were to rank these 4 check raise bluffs that I've shown, definitely the one versus CK, the one is my favorite. The 10-9 of clubs one was very good as well. And these last 2 are not quite as good. The 2 hands where I have 9s. But I think they're still somewhat reasonable. And, when people are multi-tailing and you check raise the river, it's just like, oh, 1 pair, I fold. You see a lot on like the forums where people are like, oh, how do I play this hand? And the response is often like, oh, bet fold. like bet, check, bet, fold, like tons of river bet folding. So um I felt pretty good against this guy, and I don't know, I guess I don't have tens or sevens too often. I mean, I really could still have tens or sevens, but the thing is, nobody would really expect you to have tens or sevens. They would think you would check raise it. I'm supremely confident, 100% sure that I could very easily have tens or sevens. But I guess what I'm more repping is jacks and him being scared of me and me going based off on various toes or whatever I had on him. And I actually do remember a hand from like probably 3 years ago now where I flatted the small versus like his button open or something, and I like check called the flop, turn check through, and he bluffed an ace river. So he would probably be bluffing this card 100% of the time. But the thing is, it's irrelevant because it hits him so often that it's a good bluff. Well, it's irrelevant in looking at it from his perspective. From my perspective, it just makes it that much better to check raise. And, if he's folding ace, king, ace, queen, uh, you know, 50% of the time, it's probably a good play, and it's probably profitable. Like, it wasn't that big. It was 24 to win 29.5. And I think my image is such that it's a good play. I hope that makes sense, because a lot of these situations are sort of circular arguments, and then you end up contradicting yourself. But the hand histories are cool, and I hope this one's been good. So this is my last hand of the video, and it's versus a tough opponent, smile DK exclamation point. I think he plays higher than 100 a decent amount of the time, and if he doesn't, he probably should, because I think he plays pretty well. Looking at his stats, very good, very aggressive. Wait, what's does this say ABC? That's really weird. Oh, I'm ABC too. What? Whatever. Ignore that. As I was saying, he's a very good player who, is very loose, but isn't like overly spewy, and is like tricky and balanced. And I don't really have a good handle on how he plays, but I think he does a lot of right things. So go him. He min raises the button. I flat with nines, and tilt comes along. Flop is good in the fact that like my hand's doing very well versus either of these guys' range, but I'm still not thrilled because it's just super awkward. Like on the one hand, smile DK is checking behind a lot, in which case I have the best hand a vast majority of the time. But on the other hand, I don't feel great about leading my hand, and if I were to face a raise, I guess I would fold if I were to face a raise, because I think I have eights and sixes and fives leading enough so that I could fold this hand. But I would be pretty unhappy to fold it. The other options are obviously check call and check raise, and check raise isn't terrible based on the fact that he could pretty easily call with clubs if he doesn't think he has any fold equity, and then I have the best hand. Or he could pretty easily fold like a jacks plus type hand, because any number of turn cards pretty much completely screws his hand. If you were to put a gun to my head, I would probably go with lead. But at the time, I chose to check, and I think that's fine because I check a ton in this spot. It checks through, and the turn is an ace. And I'm really, 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 really very unhappy with this hand, with this card, because I think a lot of smile DK's checking back range is an ace. And at this point, it would be sort of silly for me to lead with my nines, because either one of these two players behind me can have an ace now. So I'm sort of just being sad and just checking and hoping that they both have like some sort of spiked pair on the flop that's no longer good enough to bet, and I manage to hold up or suck out or something like that. Checks to Smile DK, and he bets 3 into 680. And his bet size is very small, but given that we both checked on the flop and the turn, I don't know if he really needs to be betting much larger than this. I think he takes it down pretty often as a bluff, and the other times it's like a very good thin value bet. Like you might say it's could be a mistake to be betting this size on such a textured board, but I think it's kind of a nifty play, and it might have induced me to do this, which is make it 12. And at the time I thought this was credible, and it is credible because if I had 8s, 6s, or 5s, which is what I'm representing at this point, I definitely would check raise his turn again because I'd expect Smile DK to be betting the turn as a bluff a ton. Not that he is the ace too often, but it would just be such a good card to fire that, I think it would be a mistake for him. Like, say he had Jack 10 and he's like, oh, well, the board's too textured to see that. Then he could be like, well, now I can fire once and fire cheaply. So it would be a spot where I would want to be check raising a decent percentage of the time. And I chose to check raise this turn. When he is ahead with me and he calls with an ace, I have 6 outs to improve. So, it was a pretty good spot, I felt like. Given that he gave me such good odds, I really could have just check called as well. Because, I'll go back and look at the percentages later, but I was probably very, very close to getting direct odds versus his hand. River's an ace, and now I'm like, well, obviously I'm not going to get him to fold out an ace at this point. But, maybe, just maybe he had a draw, or maybe he, has some sort of 8 that got counterfeited that he was making, a sick hero play with. Anything like that. I thought I had, 5% showdown value, something like that. But, obviously all goes through the roof when he bets 15. And I get kind of pissed, and I'm like, oh, well, I have a set again. I'm going to shove. And, this could be a pretty decent spot to play a set like this. And it's pretty possible that I could have gotten a fold from just trips. But it turned out that he had the ace-5 boat, which I would obviously never fold because, that hand beats, 90% of my value range. Maybe all of my value range, a lot of it. So he played his hand very well. He sized his bets pretty cool, pretty interestingly. I think my river shove is just too spewy, and that turn play, looking back at it, whoops. So I'm getting 23% pot odds on the turn, and my hand is 14%. So, obviously there's a 9% equity disparity there, but if you think about it, he's bluffing definitely enough of the time that I don't necessarily have to check raise here. Awesome, he gets to fold, whereas a lot of ace 10s and ace jacks and hands like that, but he does have this 2 pair that I never even really considered. He has ace 6 as well, probably not ace 8, but maybe, very conceivably. So it was a bit of an ambitious turn play. I like it in spirit on the turn. The river, I don't even like the spirit of it, just because it's a little bit too suicidal to get someone to fold trips, and in this spot he did have the boat, so he's folding at 0% of the time, and it was pretty bad. So I'm punishing myself by showing this last hand, and after I did it, I immediately was like, oh my god, I emailed a few friends holy shit, this is such a bad play, remind me to never do this again. And going through it again, it's bad, but it's not the end of the world, I guess. So anyways, this has been my first video for Lego Poker, and I think I'm coming out with like 3 in pretty fast succession, and hopefully I'll get some criticism, some reviews, some ideas for more videos and concepts that you guys want to see. Because I'm working for you guys, and there's only so many things that I'm gonna be motivated to come up with. I will hopefully get a lot of input from Lego members who sort of want to know some of the ins and outs of my playing style, and hopefully with Black Friday that there will be opportunities for me to show off some of my skills, and do some hand reviews, do some member video reviews, and maybe even play on the Merge network, which like might shut down, and who knows when, knowing the situation. But yeah, I hope this has been good, and best of luck at the tables.